when it comes to an engaging poetry unit, I believe the number one building block is performance. There's something about watching contemporary poets stand up and deliver their work that is just undeniably engaging. Kids might hate the piece they see performed. They might love it. They might feel their skin crawl watching it because they think the poet is so awkward, or get goosebumps because it so exactly describes their own experience. But whether they love it or they hate it, in my experience, they're into it. They're there for it, and they love debating it. So today on the podcast, I want to talk about performance poetry and how to use it in your classroom. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with my favorite clips, lesson ideas, and classroom event possibilities. Hey, real quick, if you're listening to this live, then you know that Black Friday is in just a few short days. For the first time ever, I'm offering a $1 trial on my teacher membership, The Lighthouse. This is your one-stop shop for everything that I have ever designed for ELA teachers, all my creative curriculum, all my favorite things. If you've been waiting and wondering if The Lighthouse is for you, this is the perfect opportunity to hop in, look around, see everything for yourself for just $1 for 1 week. Then if it's not right for you, you can cancel. And if it is right, you'll roll over into the regular membership cost of $25 a month. So anyway, if you're excited, if this is something you've been wanting, I suggest that you jot down in your calendar a little reminder. Friday, the Lighthouse trial. Be sure to check your email. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. So I wanted to start by talking about one of the very first things I tried with performance poetry. It's super simple, but ultimately it was also one of the most consistently successful things that I have ever done in class with performance poetry. Here's what you do. You play a clip, and you invite students to judge as if they were the judge at a slam. At a slam, a poetry slam, the judges have scorecards 1 to 10, and they just hold them up, and they just say, I give that an 8. I give that a 10. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have like some really complex rubric. And so I let students do the same thing. I play a clip and I let them write down, what do they give it? Was it okay? Do they give it a 5? Was it the best poem they've ever seen? Did they give it a 10? Did they absolutely hate it? Then they give it a 1. And I would do that with different clips and kind of different types of poetry, different types of performance, and I would let them start to see how very different their reactions were. And this was hilarious and so much fun. The looks on their faces when they would defend their 10 against somebody else who gave the same clip a 2 were so funny and meaningful, right? They really started to see that people have very different reactions to poetry, and that's okay. And they would also start to talk on their own without a lot of guidance from me about what they were attracted to, what they were maybe repelled by, and what were the elements of these poems that they were judging. Like, did they really like the hilarious comparisons? Did they really think the tone was just so terrible and that's why they hated the poem? And so it's like this wonderfully impactful warm-up into the idea of performance poetry, but also into some of the poetic elements and the poetic devices that I would be looking to bring in further down the road. So this is something you can incorporate into any poetry unit super easily. All you need is like 3 or 4 minutes at the start of class. Whether or not you're eventually going to have students even do any performing themselves, it's just a fun way to bring contemporary poetry in. Also give students a little chance to practice some public speaking skills, maybe some argument skills, depending on how you structure it. Just to give you a few clips that you might want to consider for getting started with. These are some of my favorites. They are going to be embedded in the show notes from YouTube, but you can also just look them up yourself. Harry Baker is an amazing poetry slammer. He's a Grand Slam poetry champion, and he has 2 poems that I love. One is called 59, and it's a love story about 2 prime numbers. And until you hear it, That is going to sound so weird, but when you actually hear it, I think you're going to love it. And then there's another one he does called Paper People, which is just this unbelievable tongue twister that I think your students are just going to react to, whether they love it, whether they think it's just shockingly surprising, whatever they think. I would definitely consider playing your students some Harry Baker. Then there's another one that you've probably never seen before from anyone else, because I found it at like 1 a.m. from this documentary Slam Nation 20 years ago when I was desperately looking for clips that didn't have swearing. And this is Alexandra Oliver's poem Love. And I continue to recommend it because although the video is grainy, although, it's old, it is so funny. Her performance technique is to appear to be extremely awkward, and she does it very, very well. And then the lines of her poem, she compares love to like a stale Twinkie. And in my experience, it just gets such a reaction from students. They either absolutely hate her awkward style or they think it's absolute genius. They think her comparison of love to stale Twinkies is so striking and they want to talk about that. And it's a great performance clip to share. Okay, another one that's a perennial favorite in ELA classrooms is Rudy Francisco's beautiful poem. It's called My Honest Poem. And he uses this structure of just telling these honest truths about himself so beautifully to describe himself both in straightforward terms and in really poetic language. And so this is a great one to share and judge and talk about. And it also leads itself really well into mimicry. So you can have students write their own honest poems that really tell truths about themselves, small, simple, little fun things, but also like deeper things with more poetic language. And they can copy his form and be inspired by his use of different poetic devices to try things for themselves. Okay, so that's just the tip of the iceberg. I would really recommend the Button Poetry classroom-friendly poetry channel. This is so super helpful. Before this existed, it just took a lot longer to try to find clips that were appropriate for the classroom. And of course, every classroom is different. You may feel like your students can handle one swear word. You may feel like they can't. But it is difficult to find a performance poem that has absolutely no mature language and absolutely no mature topics. So having a little help from Button Poetry's classroom-friendly channel can really be an asset to you. Okay, another way to build performance poetry into your classroom is to hold a poetry tournament. Now, this comes up on good old Instagram every March when people hold March Madness poetry tournaments, and I love that. But I also think you can do it at any time of the year. All you have to do is create a bracket on your board or on a Google slide that has the names of poems that you're going to have face off against each other. And then you just choose clips that you really like. I have a built-out poetry tournament bracket that I collaborated on with Melissa Alter-Smith from Teach Living Poets inside the Lighthouse. She also has one on her website that's totally free. Or you can just build your own. But the idea is that every day students watch 2 clips and they choose the one they like the best. And that one is the winner for them, but they have to vote, right? And so you can make the voting whatever you want. You can make it a little piece of paper with a little rubric that kind of features things you've been talking about in your poetry unit, so you can help kids to notice things like poetic language or tone or style of presentation. Or you can just make it just completely subjective and say they just close their eyes and then raise their hand if they want this one to win and raise their hand if they want this one to win. However you do it, you're going to advance one poem in the bracket, and you're just going to keep doing that throughout your unit until you get to finalists, which are the 2 most popular poems of all the ones you selected. And then maybe kick it up a notch and really have like a debate or have students write a piece about which one they think is best, and then declare your poetry performance winner. All right, another really fun activity that you can do with performance poetry in any poetry unit is to try a choral reading. And you can have students do a choral reading of a poem that they create together in a group, or that one student in that group has already created. Or you can have them do a choral reading of some poem that's one of your texts that you'd really like them to dig deeply into. Because what I always find, and I think you'll find too, is that the process of creating a choral performance of a poem helps you understand that poem so much. If you don't understand what you're reading out loud, you cannot deliver it very effectively. You cannot highlight the meaning with different choral poetry reading performance techniques if you don't really understand the meaning. So this is really neat. You can share some clips of choral readings from around YouTube. Again, I've put a couple in the show notes. And then you can put students into groups and invite them to work on things like volume changes as they read, pace changes, repetition of some key word or key phrase or key line that multiple voices come in on and repeat. Paired voices where they have two people in the group say something. Single voice where they only have one. Group voice where the whole group talks. I've got a whole list of these elements in the associated blog post with the show today, but this is a really interesting project for students. They can have somebody in the group beatbox. They can think about how they can change their tone of voice to create different moods as they read. And ultimately, when they perform their group piece back to the class, you're probably going to find, and they're probably going to find, that they know and understand that poem much better than they did at the beginning. And you can talk about the meaning behind it too. You can even have every group in the class perform the same piece and then talk about how differently they did it and what kind of meaning elements each group was trying to highlight with their performance. Okay, I have shared here before about how much I love this, what I'm going to call a genre of poetry, the I Am From poem. There's a beautiful poem called I Am From by George L. Lyon that has been sort of widely acclaimed across the internet. And there are so many spin-offs where people have created video versions and visual versions and written versions and group versions of I Am From poems. And the thing about this writing workshop is that it just always works. And I mean, I'm knocking on wood here on my desk because that's maybe I'm giving the universe a challenge. But with my students, it just always works. You give them this structure that they're going to be kind of brainstorming imagery from their early life, from their childhood, and you give them the stanzas where they say, I am from blank and blank, I am from blank and blank. And then you have them working on these sensory details to describe their childhood. And it when they plug and play it into the structure, it comes out great. It just comes out powerful and kind of emotional. And in my experience, these I Am From poems make for great performances. So every time I've held a poetry slam, which I'm going to talk about more here in a second, one of the workshops that we've done leading up to it to help students write pieces for the performance is the I Am From poetry workshop. And so whether or not you're going to have a slam, having students write this poem and think about how they would perform it, or even just perform it like with a partner in the classroom, can be a very powerful and cool activity. Okay, another thing in the poetry performance world that is out there that could be cool for your classroom is Poetry Out Loud. This is a national organization that has a lot of pre-existing guidelines and support for you in putting on a spoken word poetry event in your community. But there's a key difference between a Poetry Out Loud event and maybe like a poetry slam or a poetry jam or an open mic night that you might have at your school. At Poetry Out Loud, your students are going to be reciting poems that are not original. So they're required to use one of the poems in the anthology that's been selected for that year through the Poetry Out Loud organization. So they can still learn a ton. They can have the thrill of performance. They can learn a lot about the poem that they're memorizing and delivering. They can learn a lot about performance techniques and poetic devices and all these wonderful things. But it won't be their own original poem. So I'm linking up in the show notes all the teacher resources for Poetry Out Loud, and there are a lot. So if this is something that you're excited about, I really encourage you to look into that organization. And then last, and for me, kind of everything else builds up to this because I used almost all of these other elements when I would host a poetry slam, is to host a poetry slam. At this point, I've hosted more than 20 student poetry slams, and They are amazing. They are so powerful. And for me, each one has followed a pretty similar flow. I don't make it a big, huge, giant deal. We usually spend about 1 week preparing for them and then hosting our slam on Friday. And that week was like action-packed, so exciting. The kids were so invested in quickly writing poems and quickly learning to perform them and watching clips and judging them and doing choral readings, because it was all building to this poetry slam that we were going to be hosting. And I would let them be in charge of the look, the feel, the judging, the decor, the programs, everything about the poetry slam. So here's kind of how the week would work. On Monday, I would roll it out. I would say, hey, on Friday, we're going to have a poetry slam. Gasp. Everyone would be like, what? And I would explain what a poetry slam was, how, everybody would get up and say a poem. They could have a script if they wanted to. That was fine. They would have judges that would score each poem on a scale of 1 to 10, but it was all just meant to be fun. The point is not the points. The point is poetry, as this famous slam master, Alan Wolfe, once said. Then we would look at clips, we would judge them, we would discuss them just like we've talked about. We would do choral readings, we would do I am from poems, we would do other kinds of writing workshops. We would look at classic poems, we would talk about poetic devices. I would let the students form into committees to produce the slams. There would be a committee in charge of the ambiance, and a committee in charge of the judging and the MC, and a committee in charge of the programs. And those committees would meet for a few minutes every day to kind of advance their agenda and make all their big, important decisions. I would check in and just make sure they weren't planning anything that wouldn't work. But none of my committees ever did. They planned fun things. In one slam, the ambiance committee brought burritos for everyone in the class. In one slam, the MC rapped the introductions for all the poets, and it was amazing. I never knew exactly what they would come up with, but they would come up with something awesome. And over, year after year, like different classes, different years, different schools, even different countries, because I did this both in the US and in Bulgaria where I was teaching. These slams would be some of the most memorable, fun, exciting events of the year. The kids would cheer wildly for each other. They would be like so excited about the programs and the guest judges and the, unique ambiance of whatever the ambiance committee came up with. And they would be so excited when the MC took the stage and like actually had a microphone that the MC committee had actually figured out how to set up. And it was just, I'm getting very excited, as I am prone to do on this podcast, but it was just such a joy every time. And so I really want to invite you to jump in and try it. If you don't want to do the competition aspect, you can do all these exact same things, but just make it a poetry jam or a poetry open mic night where kids perform, but they don't get a number. But for us, like the kids really seemed to enjoy having these guest judges that they brought in and crowning a slam champion. And it was just like a real builder-upper for that student, but it really felt like a builder-upper for every student because they were all part of the process of creating the slam itself. They all performed a poem, which at the beginning of the week they would never have thought they could do, and they just came away from it with these amazing memories of being clapped for by their peers. So really, I encourage you to consider trying having a slam in your class. Just take a week. Try it in a very short time frame. Don't build it up as needing to be this perfect thing that everybody prepares for a month and memorizes every word. I think that makes it a lot more pressured. When it comes together really quickly, it's just like this cool experience. Nobody has to be perfect. It was quick, and you can just enjoy it for what it is. And then after that first year, if you realize you want to expand it and change it and add to it, you can, but you will kind of have that foundational experience to build on. So those are all the ideas I wanted to share with you. I really hope you're going to jump in with one of these ideas or all of these ideas and think about how you can use performance poetry in your poetry units, because really it makes such an impact on engagement, and I just couldn't recommend it more. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about all things performance poetry. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.